This video appeared to you for a purpose. Watch it carefully. Something in you stopped. Not your hand, not your eyes. Something deeper. Something that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for exactly this moment. You didn't find this video. You were brought to it. And the part of you that knows the difference is the same part that has been trying to get your attention for a very long time. You've been feeling something lately. A weight that arrives before you've even opened your eyes in the morning. A low, persistent hum of tension that follows you through your day. A sense that something is off, not in a way you can point to, not in a way anyone around you would necessarily understand, but in a way you feel in the deepest part of your chest when everything goes quiet and there is nothing left to distract you from it. You've tried to manage it. You've tried to think your way through it, stay busy enough that it loses its grip. And some days that works. But it always comes back, because it was never going to stop until you heard what it was actually trying to say. What you are about to receive is not advice. It is not a list of steps designed to make your life more manageable. What this is, at its core, is a transmission. A set of truths so precise and so personally addressed to the version of you sitting here right now, that by the time this video ends, something in the way you see your own life will have permanently shifted. The universe has a language. It does not speak in thunder or grand miracles. It speaks in the quiet accumulation of signs your rational mind has been trained to dismiss, the same thought returning for the 100th time. The door that closed just as you were certain it was about to open. The sudden, inexplicable certainty that something needs to change, even when everything on the surface appears fine. These are not coincidences. What you have been calling coincidence is the universe signing its name at the bottom of a message it has been writing specifically for you. Stay with this, not with your eyes, with everything you've been carrying. The pull that brought you here was not random. You did not stumble here. That word, stumble, implies a universe governed by randomness, where souls drift without direction. And if there is one thing you need to understand before anything else in this video can reach you, randomness is not what brought you here. Precision did. Think about the quality of attention you gave this video before it even began. It wasn't idle scrolling. Something in you recognized this before the first word. Something ancient and deeply knowing said, "This one," not yet understanding why. Just knowing. That knowing is not a feeling to be analyzed. It is a faculty. A navigational intelligence that every human soul possesses and that almost no one is ever taught to trust. The Stoic philosophers called it the capacity to discern, the ability of the inner self to perceive what the outer mind cannot yet articulate. Every tradition that has ever looked honestly at human consciousness has arrived at the same recognition. There is something in you that knows, something that moves before thought does. And that something brought you here, at this exact moment in your personal timeline, when you are carrying exactly what you are carrying, when the version of you that is done with the old way of moving through life is finally ready to receive something the earlier version could not have heard. The universe does not deliver messages ahead of schedule. Every soul arrives at its turning points exactly when it is supposed to, not a moment early, not a single moment late. And the turning points always feel like this. Quiet, unremarkable from the outside, a video, a pause, a decision to stay. You stayed. That is not a small thing. Most people would have kept scrolling. You didn't. The question is no longer whether this moment means something. You already know it does. The question now is whether you are willing to follow it all the way to where it leads. The weight has a name, and it was never yours to carry alone. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. You know the one. It is there when you wake up before the day has asked anything of you. It is there in the middle of conversations with people you genuinely care about, sitting just beneath the surface, making everything feel slightly more distant than it should. It is there at night, when the distractions finally run out and the mind accelerates instead of resting, replaying what was said, rehearsing what might happen, measuring the distance between where you are and where you believed you would be by now. That is not tiredness. That is the weight. And you have been carrying it so long that you have likely stopped questioning whether it belongs to you. The source is this. Somewhere along the way, through the architecture of your upbringing, your experiences, your culture, you were assigned responsibilities that were never meant for a human soul to carry. You have been holding outcomes the universe was always supposed to hold. You have been trying to guarantee things that exist, by their very nature, beyond the reach of any guarantee. The Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus named this as the single most important understanding a human being could arrive at in one lifetime. Everything within our control, our choices, our attention, our response to what arrives, belongs to us completely. Everything outside that boundary, the behavior of others, the timing of outcomes, the unfolding of circumstances, belongs to the universe. And the suffering that enters a life is almost always located at that boundary, where a soul has reached across it and tried to hold what was never placed in its hands. That reaching is what the weight is made of. Not weakness, not failure. The weight is the accumulated tension of a soul that cares deeply and has been trying to control a river that has its own direction, its own intelligence, and its own destination. You cannot carry the river. And the fact that you have been trying, with such dedication, such sincerity, such cost to your own peace, is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is evidence of how completely you were never shown where your responsibilities actually end and where the universes begin. That line exists. It is real, it is precise, and it is the most liberating boundary you will ever discover. Everything from this moment forward is going to help you find it. And finally, with full permission, put down what was never yours to carry in the first place. The signs you dismissed were the most important messages you ever received. Think back, not to the dramatic moments. Think back to the quiet ones. The morning you woke up with an inexplicable certainty that something needed to change, and by afternoon convinced yourself it was just a mood. The relationship that felt wrong from the very first conversation, not in a way you could articulate, but in a way your body registered with absolute clarity before your mind had the chance to negotiate. The opportunity you almost pursued, the one that lit something up in you briefly, before the voice of practicality arrived and listed all the reasons why it wasn't the right time. You dismissed them, not because you were careless, but because you were never taught that those moments were a language. You were never given a framework for understanding that the universe communicates not in declarations, but in whispers, and that the soul, when truly paying attention, hears those whispers before the mind has even formed the question. Every major wisdom tradition has carried this recognition at its center. The ancient Egyptians called it the intelligence of the heart. The Sufi mystics spent entire lifetimes learning to distinguish between genuine inner guidance and the voice of ego dressed up as guidance. Modern neuroscience is only now catching up. The human nervous system processes enormous amounts of information beneath conscious awareness and surfaces it as intuition, as physical sensation, as sudden, unexplained knowing. These are not accidents of brain chemistry. They are dispatches. And the ones you dismissed did not disappear. Messages the universe sends with genuine urgency do not give up. They change form. The whisper you didn't hear becomes the situation you couldn't ignore. The gentle pull you rationalized away becomes the crisis that finally stops you in your tracks. Look at your life right now. Not the surface, but the recurring patterns. The same difficulty arriving through different circumstances. The same lesson in different relationships. That repetition is not bad luck. It is the universe being extraordinarily faithful to you, continuing to send the message in increasingly impossible to ignore forms until the moment you are ready to receive it. You are ready now. You would not still be here if you weren't. The most important thing you can do from this moment forward is not to search harder for signs you might be missing. It is to stop dismissing the ones already arriving. The sign you need is rarely far away. More often than not, it is the very thing you are feeling right now, in this moment, in this body, that you have been telling yourself doesn't count as real information. It counts. It has always counted. The version of you that already has it all together is not in the future. It is waiting beneath the surface of right now. There is a story you have been telling yourself about time. It is so embedded in how you think that you likely haven't noticed it as a story at all. And it goes like this. The version of you that is at peace, that is whole, that has figured out the things that still feel unresolved. That version exists somewhere ahead of you, on the other side of the thing you are currently trying to solve. When this is finished, then I will feel like myself. When this is resolved, then my real life will begin. That story is the single most sophisticated trap the human mind constructs, and it is constructed entirely from love, from the genuine desire of a soul that wants its life to mean something. The trap is not made of laziness or delusion. It is made of hope pointed in the wrong direction. Because the version of you that you are waiting to become is not being assembled in your future. It is not accumulating piece by piece as you check items off a list of things to be fixed. That version, the one that is grounded, clear, that moves through life with genuine presence, is not ahead of you. It is underneath you. The Zen tradition has carried this understanding for over 1,000 years. Awakening is not an arrival but a recognition, not a construction but an uncovering. Carl Jung spent his entire career mapping the human psyche and arrived at the same conclusion. What he called the self is not something that needs to be created. It needs to be freed. The work is not addition, it is excavation. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most like yourself, not most successful, most like yourself. Those moments almost certainly had one quality in common. Something you habitually carry was, for whatever reason, temporarily absent. The performance was suspended. The gap between who you actually are and who you are trying to appear to be closed, not because you achieved something, but because something fell away. That falling away is not an accident. It is a preview. The soul showing you, briefly, what is available beneath the accumulated weight of everything you've been taught to carry. The version of you that already has it together does not need to be built. It needs to be uncovered. And the uncovering does not begin when your circumstances finally align. It begins. It can only ever begin. The moment you stop treating your wholeness as a destination and start recognizing it as the ground you are already standing on. The door to that version of you does not have a lock. It never did. It only ever had the weight of everything you were carrying pressed against it from the other side. You already know what to put down. The people who could not stay were not a punishment. They were a preparation. There are people who are no longer in your life who once felt permanent, not just important, permanent, in the way that certain presences become so woven into the texture of your daily experience that you stop distinguishing between them and the ground itself. And then they were gone. Some left with explanation, some left without one, some left in the slow, quiet way that losses often happen. Not a single moment of departure, but a gradual withdrawal that you watched happen and could not stop regardless of how much effort you brought to trying. Some left in ways that still carry a charge, a residue of grief or the specific pain of feeling like you are not enough to make someone stay. If you have been carrying that last interpretation, the story in which they're leaving is evidence of your insufficiency, then what I am about to say is perhaps the most important thing you will hear in this entire video. Their leaving was not a verdict on your worth. It was a function of their path. And more than that, it was a function of yours. Rumi wrote that the wound is the place where the light enters. Not that pain is good, but that the openings loss creates in us, the places where the walls of our identity crack under the weight of what we could not hold, are exactly the places through which something new, something necessary, finally finds its way in. Every person who has walked through your life and departed has left something behind. Not just memory, something structural, something that reorganized the interior landscape of who you are, in ways so fundamental that the current version of you could not have existed without the specific losses that shaped it. The friend who left during the period when you needed someone most taught you something about your own resilience that no amount of continued support could have installed. The relationship that ended before you were ready forced you to discover a capacity for self-sustaining you would never have developed inside the comfort of its continuation. This is not a philosophy designed to make loss feel smaller than it is. Loss is enormous. The grief of a human being who has loved genuinely is one of the most sacred experiences available to a soul. Sacred precisely because it measures how fully you were present, how genuinely you allowed another person to matter. But the sacred nature of loss does not end with the grief. It continues into what the grief makes possible. The people who could not stay were not failures of your story. They were essential chapters of it. They were, in the most precise sense, preparation. For the depth you now carry, for the discernment you now possess, for the quality of connection you are now capable of both offering and receiving. You were not abandoned into emptiness. You were prepared into readiness. Silence is not empty. It is where the most important answers have always been waiting. You live in a world that is afraid of silence, not openly afraid. The fear expresses itself more quietly, in the instinct to reach for your phone the moment a pause arrives, in the background noise that gets turned on not because you want to listen, but because the absence of sound feels like something that needs to be filled. We call it boredom, we call it restlessness, but what it actually is, what is happening in the nervous system of a person who cannot tolerate genuine silence, is a flight from the interior, a persistent, exhausting, culturally sanctioned running from the one place where the answers to the questions that matter most have always been quietly, patiently waiting. Every contemplative tradition arrived independently at the same discovery. The Desert Fathers retreated into silence not because the world had nothing to offer, but because they recognized something the world could not provide. The Buddhist concept of shamatha, the stilling of mental activity as a prerequisite for genuine insight, is foundational, because clarity does not emerge from more thinking. It emerges from the suspension of the compulsive thinking that runs continuously beneath everything, consuming enormous energy, and producing almost no genuine wisdom. What all of these traditions understood is that the mind has two fundamentally incompatible modes of operation. The first, analytical, problem-solving, narrative constructing, is extraordinary. It is the source of every practical achievement in your life. But it cannot hear the deeper signal because its operation is itself so loud it drowns out everything beneath it. The second mode is quieter, slower, and infinitely more intelligent in the domain that matters most. The domain of genuine knowing. Not knowledge, knowing. The kind that tells you not what is true in general, but what is true for you, specifically right now. The kind that the most important decisions of a human life actually require. That mode cannot operate above the noise. It simply waits. With incomprehensible patience, it waits in the silence you have been avoiding, holding everything you actually need to know, available the moment you become willing to stop moving long enough to receive it. You have had moments of this. The answer that arrived in the shower, the sudden clarity on the long drive when the radio was off. Those were demonstrations. Your own deeper knowing showing you what it can offer when given the one condition it requires. The practice of creating silence in your life is not a spiritual luxury. It is, for anyone serious about living in genuine alignment with what they actually know and value, an absolute necessity, not hours of it. Just the daily committed practice of creating a space, even 10 minutes in a morning before the noise begins, in which you stop performing, stop consuming, and simply become available to what is already present in the quiet. What you will find there will not be emptiness. It never is. What you will find is everything you already know. Patiently arranged, quietly waiting, entirely unchanged by how long it took you to arrive. You are not behind. You are exactly where your particular journey requires you to be. There is a comparison happening inside you that you may not have fully examined. It runs quietly, almost automatically, in the background of nearly every assessment you make about where you are in life. It activates when you encounter someone your age who has achieved something you have not. It surfaces when you scroll through the curated evidence of other people's progress. It whispers, "You are behind. You should be further along. The timeline you were supposed to be on has somehow passed you by." That voice is not telling you the truth, and the specific way it is lying is worth examining, because the lie is subtle enough to have survived casual scrutiny for years. The lie is the premise that there is a timeline you are supposed to be on, the premise that genuine development, the kind that changes not just your circumstances but the actual quality of your consciousness, follows a schedule that can be compared across different human beings. It cannot, because no two human beings are doing the same job. Your life has a specific curriculum, not imposed from outside, but emerging from the precise intersection of who you are, what you carry, what the particular shape of your experience has made necessary for your soul to encounter and move through. That curriculum does not look like anyone else's. It cannot be accelerated by comparison any more than a student learning one language can measure their progress by someone learning a completely different one. The Tao Te Ching recognized that the path which can be named as a universal path is not the genuine path, that the way things unfold at the level of the real is too specific, too particular, too responsive to the individual to be captured in a general prescription. The deviation from the expected path is not failure. In most cases, it is precision. Consider the people you most admire, not for their achievements alone, but for the quality of who they are, the wisdom they carry, the groundedness they project. Almost universally, if you know their story with real depth, you will find that the quality you admire was not produced by the portion of their life that went according to plan. It was produced by the detours, by the periods that looked from outside like stagnation or failure, by the seasons of apparent stillness that were, beneath the surface, the most metabolically active periods of their entire development. The years you spent in what felt like delay were not subtracted from your life. They were added to your depth. The things that took you longer than they should have are not evidence that you are slow. They are evidence that you were thorough, that the understanding being built in you was built at the level of the foundation, where it will hold the weight of everything coming with a solidity that faster construction could never have provided. There is no version of your life that was supposed to look different from how it has looked. There is only the version that happened, which is also the version that produced you, with exactly the particular capacities and hard-won wisdom that the next chapter of your life will be built upon. The timeline you were measuring yourself against was never yours. Yours is the one you are already on. The version of love you settled for taught you what you actually deserve. There was a version of love you accepted because you did not yet know you could ask for more. Not because you were foolish, but because we can only ask for what we believe we are eligible to receive. And what we believe we are eligible to receive is shaped, with almost architectural precision, by every experience of love that came before, beginning with the very first ones, the ones that arrived before we had language for them, before we were anything other than an open and entirely undefended nervous system absorbing the emotional temperature of the environment we were born into. Those early experiences did not just teach you what love feels like. They taught you what love is. They installed a template, below the level of conscious thought, that your psyche then used to recognize love in everything that came after. And if the early template was built from love that was conditional, intermittent, or expressed through control rather than freedom, then the template became a map that led you, reliably and repeatedly, toward versions of connection that replicated the familiar emotional texture of what you had learned to call love, even when those versions were leaving you consistently unfed. John Bowlby's attachment theory documented what indigenous wisdom traditions have always known, that the patterns established in our earliest experiences of being loved do not stay in the past. They travel forward. They show up in who we are drawn to, in what feels like chemistry, in what feels like home, even when what feels like home has never been entirely safe. This is not a flaw in you. It is a function of how love learning works. But the pattern is not destiny. The template is not permanent. Every experience of love, including and perhaps especially the ones that were insufficient, carries within it the seeds of its own correction, if you are willing to examine what it taught you with more honesty than self-protection. The relationship in which you were loved only when performing correctly taught you, with painful specificity, what conditional love feels like from the inside, what it costs, what it requires you to abandon of yourself in order to maintain it. And in teaching you that, it gave you the most precise possible education in what you will not settle for again. once you believe you deserve the alternative. The relationship in which you were present but not truly seen taught you the difference between being witnessed and being accommodated. That difference, once felt from both sides, becomes a standard you carry in your body rather than your mind. Every love that was not quite right was a calibration. Every relationship that ended refined your understanding of what you are actually seeking beneath the surface of what you thought you wanted. The heartbreaks were not interruptions to the journey toward love. They were the journey. You are not damaged by what you settled for. You are informed by it. The love you deserve is not a fantasy constructed in the absence of experience. It is a standard forged in the fire of exactly the experiences you have already had. You know what it is not with a specificity that only someone who has lived through its opposite could possess. And that knowing is not nothing. It is the foundation on which a love that actually fits the full dimensions of who you are can finally, and without apology, be built. Healing is not linear, and the days you fall back are not evidence that you haven't moved forward. There will be days that feel like proof that nothing has changed. Days when something, a song, a smell, a phrase someone uses in exactly the wrong place, reaches past every layer of work you have done and touches the original wound, as if the years between then and now did not exist. As if the therapy, the reflection, the hard conversations, the boundaries you learned to hold, as if none of it happened, as if you are back at the beginning. On those days, the interior voice that has always been most cruel to you will say that this is evidence, that the collapse back into the old feeling is proof that the healing was not real, that your relapse into pain confirms the thing you have always most feared, that you are at some fundamental level beyond repair. That voice is not telling you the truth. Healing is not the elimination of the wound. It is the changing of your relationship to it. This distinction is not semantic. It is the difference between a model of recovery that is achievable and one that will defeat you every time. The neural pathways laid down by significant experiences, particularly experiences of loss, of fear, of the pain that arrives through people we have allowed to matter most, do not get deleted. The brain does not work that way. What changes through genuine healing is not the absence of those pathways, but the development of new ones. New responses, new capacities, new patterns that over time become increasingly available, even in the moments when the old pathways fire. But the old pathways do not stop firing. Not entirely. Not forever. On the days when the conditions are right, when the trigger is precise enough or the resources are low enough, they will fire with something close to their original intensity. This is not failure. This is the texture of what healing actually looks like from the inside. Viktor Frankl observed in the most extreme laboratory of human suffering something that applies to every scale of recovery. That the measure of healing is not whether you still feel pain, but what you do in the space between the stimulus and your response. The space itself, the gap between being triggered and being consumed, is where the evidence of genuine change actually lives. In the early stages of real healing, that space can be almost imperceptibly small. A fraction of a second, a barely detectable pause, but it is there, and it grows, not linearly, not on a smooth upward trajectory. It grows with plateaus that feel like stagnation, with regressions that feel like failure, with periods of apparent backward movement that are, beneath the surface, the consolidation of gains not yet visible but already structural. The 2 steps forward and 1 step back you have been experiencing is not a sign that your net movement is insufficient. The step back is part of the same process, the integration phase, where the system tests the new pattern against old conditions, discovers where the new ground is still soft, and builds additional support precisely where the regression revealed it was needed. The person you were at the beginning of this process would not have survived today's hard day the way you just survived it. That difference is not nothing. That difference is everything. The life you keep postponing is the only one you are ever going to get. There is a life you are waiting to begin. You may not have named it as waiting. The mind disguises postponement as preparation, as responsibility, as the reasonable acknowledgement of timing that is not yet quite right. It does not announce itself as delay. It presents itself as wisdom. The mature recognition that certain conditions need to be in place before certain things can begin. When the finances stabilize, when the relationship resolves, when I feel more certain, when I have finally arrived at the version of myself that feels adequate to the life I keep postponing in its name. What this waiting does not announce is the assumption concealed within it. The assumption that the future in which conditions are finally right is a future that is coming, that the life you are deferring is being held somewhere in reserve, intact and available, growing more achievable with every responsible day of preparation you complete in the present. It is not. The future is not a holding space where the unlived life waits patiently. The future is simply a series of present moments that have not happened yet, each of which will arrive already full, already containing its own demands, its own incompleteness, its own conditions that are not quite right. The version of you who finally has everything in order before beginning to live is a version that does not exist, has never existed, and will never exist, because the nature of a human life is that there is always something not yet resolved, always something that could justify one more period of waiting. Seneca observed what 2,000 years have done nothing to date. Dum differtur vita transcurrit. While we are postponing, life speeds by. The act of postponing living until conditions are right is itself a way of living. The waiting is not neutral time. It is your time. It is your life. The irreplaceable, non-renewable, already in progress substance of your actual existence, moving through the present at the same rate whether you are fully inhabiting it or holding it at arm's length. Mary Oliver asked the question that has stayed in cultural memory precisely because it touches something that does not allow itself to be touched without producing a response. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The weight of that question is in the word one, not a rehearsal followed by the performance, not a preparation followed by the actual living. One, singular, non-duplicable, already underway, already spending itself in every moment of every day regardless of whether you have decided yet to show up for it completely. The conditions will never be perfect. There will always be something unresolved, something a reasonable person could cite as justification for waiting just a little longer. The question is not whether conditions will eventually become perfect, they will not. The question is what you are going to do with the life that is happening right now. In the middle of the imperfection, inside the uncertainty, before the resolution you have been waiting for has arrived, because that is the only place it has ever been possible to actually live. Not later. Not when things settle. Not when you become the version of yourself you have been waiting to become. Now. Here. Exactly this is the life. And it has been waiting for you to show up to it fully for longer than either of you should have to wait. You are not built for the version of life you have been tolerating. There is a version of your life you have been tolerating. Not consciously. Not with the explicit decision that this specific configuration of circumstances, relationships, habits, and daily rhythms is what you choose. More often it arrived gradually, the way water finds its level, through a series of small accommodations so incremental that no single one of them felt like a defining choice. You said yes to something because the cost of no felt too high in that moment. You stayed in something because the uncertainty of leaving felt more threatening than the discomfort of remaining. You adjusted. You adapted. You made it work. And somewhere in the accumulation of all that making it work, the gap between the life you are living and the life that actually fits you became so familiar that you stopped registering it as a gap at all. That gap has a name. The philosopher Thoreau called it quiet desperation, the condition of a life lived at the surface of its own potential, responsive to every external demand and largely absent from its own interior. But the name matters less than the recognition, and the recognition is simply this. There is a quality of life available to you that is different from what you have been tolerating. Not a fantasy life, not a life without difficulty or loss, or the ordinary frictions of being a human being in a complicated world. A life that is more genuinely yours, more aligned with what you actually value, more honest about what you actually need, more fully inhabited by the person you actually are, rather than the person the accumulated pressures of your history have shaped you to perform. The distance between those two lives is not measured in circumstances. It is measured in permission. The permission to want what you actually want without editing it into something more reasonable, more achievable, more considerate of everyone else's comfort. The permission to acknowledge what is not working without the immediate defensive move toward explaining why it is actually fine, or why you should be grateful, or why other people have it so much harder. The permission to take seriously, with the full seriousness it deserves, the quiet signal that has been telling you, with extraordinary patience, that something needs to change. You are not built for smallness. You are not designed for the half-life of a person who has decided, beneath the level of conscious awareness, that the full expression of who they are is somehow too much, too demanding, too inconvenient, too risky to actually pursue. The soul that is in you did not arrive with a limited bandwidth. It arrived with everything required to live a life that is genuine and expansive and fully inhabited. What has been limiting it is not your capacity. It is your permission. And permission is the one thing that no circumstance can give you or take away from you. It is entirely, irrevocably, and always yours to extend to yourself, at any moment, including this one. The story you keep telling about yourself is the cage, and you hold the key. There is a story you have been telling about yourself for so long that you have stopped experiencing it as a story. You experience it as a fact, as simply the truth of what you are, your limitations, your patterns, your characteristic ways of failing or falling short, or arriving at the same frustrating destinations through different routes. This is just how I am. You tell yourself this not with despair necessarily, but with the tired authority of someone who has accumulated enough evidence that the verdict feels settled. The case is closed. The story is simply accurate. But a story is not a fact, even when it has been true. And the most important distinction you may ever draw in your own life is the distinction between what has been true about you and what will always be true about you. Because those are not the same thing, and confusing them is the mechanism by which a past that is finished continues to govern a future that has not yet been written. The neuroscientist and author Lisa Feldman Barrett has documented something that disrupts the common understanding of how the brain works, that the mind does not passively perceive reality and then respond to it. It predicts reality, based on the accumulated database of everything it has experienced before, and then perceives selectively in ways that confirm its predictions. Which means that the story you hold about yourself is not just a passive description. It is an active filter, shaping what you notice, what you interpret as meaningful, what possibilities you register as available to you, and which ones you move past without recognition, because they do not fit the narrative the mind has already decided is true. The story is not just describing your cage. In a very precise neurological sense, it is constructing it. The invitation here is not the shallow optimism of simply deciding to tell yourself a better story and expecting reality to follow obediently. The interior life is not that simple, and it does not respond to instructions that have not been earned through genuine interior work. But it does respond, over time, through practice, through the accumulation of experiences that do not fit the old story and therefore require the story to expand or revise, to the deliberate, sustained, honest examination of whether what you have been telling yourself is as fixed and final as you have been treating it. What is one thing the old story says you cannot do that you have in fact already done, even imperfectly, even once, even in a way so small you barely counted it? That exception is not an anomaly to be explained away. It is evidence. It is the crack in the wall of the narrative through which a different understanding of who you are is already, quietly, finding its way through. The story is not the truth of you. It is a map drawn from old territory, and you have already traveled beyond its edges. What you are looking for has been looking for you. There is something you have been seeking. You may have different names for it at different moments. Peace, clarity, purpose, belonging, the sense of being genuinely known. It may present itself as a specific goal or a specific relationship, or a specific version of your life that you believe, once reached, will finally produce the thing underneath all of those names. The thing that all of the seeking is actually seeking. The thing that, when it is present even briefly, makes everything else feel like it has weight and meaning, and when it is absent, leaves even the most objectively successful moments feeling hollow in a way you can never quite explain to anyone who isn't already looking for the same thing. Here is what every wisdom tradition that has ever engaged seriously with this question has ultimately arrived at, expressed in 100 different languages and 1,000 different forms, but converging on the same recognition. What you are looking for is not outside you. This is not the dismissive shorthand of someone telling you that your external circumstances don't matter, or that the things you want and need in the world are somehow less real than the things you might find through interior work. External circumstances matter. Genuine connection matters. Purpose expressed in the world, through work and relationship and the specific contribution that only you can make, matters enormously. The seeking is not misguided, but the source of what the seeking is actually for. The ground of peace, the sense of being home inside your own life. The quality of okayness that does not depend on any particular outcome to be in place. That has never been located outside you, in anything, and every person who has found it, who carries it in a way that you can recognize immediately as the real thing and not the performance of it, has found it through the same essential movement, not the acquisition of the right circumstances. The return to something that was always already present. You have felt it. In the moments of genuine stillness, genuine connection, genuine presence. Moments when the continuous negotiation between who you are and who you think you need to be briefly suspended. You have felt it. That is not a memory of something you once had and lost. That is a signal. That is the deepest part of you making contact with itself and showing you, with great generosity, that what you are looking for is not somewhere you have not yet been. It is somewhere you have already been, briefly, intermittently, in the spaces between the noise. The practice is not to find it for the first time. The practice is to return to it more reliably, to create the conditions, interior and exterior, in which the contact happens more frequently, lasts longer, survives more of the friction of ordinary life. To build a life that is increasingly oriented toward what you actually are, rather than increasingly defended against the fear of what you might discover if you looked. What you are looking for has been looking for you. It has been looking for you through every reaching and every loss and every moment of inexplicable yearning. And every night when the silence came and brought with it the sense that there is something more, something realer, something more genuinely yours, just beneath the surface of the life you have been living. You are not far from it. You are, in fact, extraordinarily close. The only distance that remains is the distance between the life you have been performing and the life you have been. And that distance is shorter than you think. This video appeared to you for a purpose. You stayed for the same reason. Now you know what to do with that.